Story 1. It was a normal day when Sarah stumbled upon a red phone box in the middle of a deserted field. She had never seen one before and was immediately drawn to it. As she approached, she noticed that the door was slightly ajar, and a faint light was coming from inside. Curiosity getting the best of her, Sarah pushed open the door and stepped inside. The inside was dimly lit, with a single rotary phone hanging from the wall. Sarah picked up the phone and put it to her ear, but there was no dial tone, just static. As she was about to hang up, a voice whispered in her ear, "Hello?" Sarah was startled but replied, "Hello? Who is this?" The voice on the other end was garbled and hard to understand, but Sarah thought she heard the words help and trapped. Suddenly, the phone went dead, and Sarah was left standing in the dark, eerie silence of the phone box. She quickly left, feeling a sense of unease. Days went by, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She decided to go back to the phone box to investigate further. When she arrived, the door was wide open, and the light was even dimmer than before. Sarah hesitated before stepping inside, but her curiosity got the best of her once again. She picked up the phone and heard the same garbled voice on the other end. This time, the voice was clearer, and Sarah could make out the words "trapped" and "help" more clearly. Sarah tried to ask the voice who they were and where they were trapped, but the only response was an eerie laughter before the phone went dead again. Sarah left the phone box feeling even more unnerved than before. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and that phone box was somehow connected to it. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the phone box. She became obsessed with it, and her curiosity turned into a compulsion. She would visit it every day, hoping to hear the voice on the other end of the line again. One day, Sarah received a call on her cell phone. The caller ID read unknown, and when she answered, she heard the same garbled voice she had heard from the red phone box. The voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come back," before the line went dead. Sarah tried to ignore the call, but the phone wouldn't stop ringing. She turned it off and tried to go about her day, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That night, Sarah heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, there was no one there, just the sound of static coming from the darkness. She quickly shut the door and locked it, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. The next day, Sarah decided to investigate the phone box one last time. When she arrived, the door was open, and the phone was off the hook. Sarah picked up the phone and heard the voice on the other end, clear as day. The voice whispered, "You're trapped now," before the line went dead. Suddenly, the door to the phone box slammed shut, trapping Sarah inside. She tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. The air inside the phone box grew thick, and Sarah struggled to breathe. As she gasped for air, she heard the eerie laughter of the voice on the other end of the line. Sarah realized too late that the red phone box was a gateway to something sinister, and that she had fallen victim to its trap. The phone box remains there in the deserted field, tempting unsuspecting visitors with its eerie glow and the promise of something otherworldly. But beware, for those who enter may never leave. Story 2. When I was a child, there was a phone number that haunted me. It was a local number that was just one digit different from my own, and every time I dialed my own number, I would accidentally dial that number instead. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the more I accidentally called that number, the more I started to hear strange things on the other end of the line. At first, it was just static, but then I started to hear whispering. It was always just a few words, too quiet to make out, but I could tell there was something there. I would hang up and try again, thinking it was just a glitch, but the whispers continued. One day, I decided to be brave and ask who was on the other end of the line. "Hello?" I said tentatively, waiting for a response. There was a long pause before I heard a voice, barely audible, whisper, "Help me." I was so scared that I hung up immediately and ran to tell my parents. They brushed it off as a prank call or a wrong number, but I knew something was wrong. I kept accidentally dialing the number and hearing the same whispers over and over again, always just a few words, but always sounding more desperate. Eventually, I got up the nerve to try and have a conversation with whoever was on the other end of the line. I said, "Who are you?" And after a long pause, the voice whispered back, "I'm trapped." I didn't know what to do or how to help, but I knew I had to try. I kept calling the number and asking questions, trying to get more information, but the voice was always so faint and hard to understand. Sometimes, it would just laugh, an eerie, sinister laugh that sent shivers down my spine. I became obsessed with the phone number, spending all my free time trying to get through to whoever was on the other end of the line. I stopped telling my parents about it, knowing they wouldn't believe me, and kept it a secret. One day, I finally got through to someone who spoke clearly. It was a woman, and she sounded scared and desperate. She said her name was Sarah, and that she was trapped in some kind of dark, eerie place. I didn't know what to do or how to help, but I promised I would try. I started doing research, trying to figure out where Sarah might be trapped, but I couldn't find anything. I kept calling the number, but Sarah never answered again. The only thing I could hear was that eerie laughter, mocking me. Years went by, and I grew up, but the memory of that phone number never left me. I never told anyone about it, not even my closest friends or partners. I was afraid they would think I was crazy or that I had made it all up. One day, I decided to drive past the house where that number used to be. It was a rundown, abandoned house, and the phone line had been cut. But as I drove away, I heard the faint sound of that eerie laughter, still taunting me after all these years. To this day, I still don't know what happened to Sarah or who was on the other end of that phone line. As he got closer to the house, John could see that it was in a state of disrepair. The paint was peeling, the roof was caving in, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. He hesitated for a moment before approaching the door, but he knew he had to find out who was calling him. John knocked on the door, and to his surprise, it swung open on its own. He stepped inside, and the musty smell of neglect hit him like a ton of bricks. The house was dark, and he could barely see anything in front of him. Suddenly, he heard a child's laughter coming from upstairs. It was a playful sound, but it sent shivers down his spine. He slowly made his way up the stairs, each creak echoing through the silent house. As he reached the top of the stairs, he saw a small figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a child, but there was something off about it. Its skin was pale, and its eyes were black, with no whites or pupils. John tried to back away, but his feet wouldn't move. The child began to move towards him, its laughter turning into a low growl. John could feel its icy breath on his face as it whispered, "I've been waiting for you." Suddenly, the lights flickered on, and John was alone in the hallway. He ran down the stairs and out of the house as fast as he could. He didn't stop until he was miles away, safe in his own home. John never found out who had called him from that phone number, but he knew he would never forget the terror he felt in that abandoned house. He still hears the child's laughter in his nightmares, and he knows that he will never be truly safe again. The end. Story 3. It was a dark and stormy night when I found myself wandering down a desolate street. The rain poured down in sheets, drenching me to the bone. The only sound was the splashing of my shoes in the puddles. As I walked, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I turned around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off and continued walking, but the feeling only grew stronger. That's when I heard it, the ringing of an old phone booth on the side of the road. I approached it cautiously, but as I got closer, the ringing stopped. The sign above the booth read out of order, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside. I cautiously pushed open the door and stepped inside. The inside of the booth was cramped and musty, with a broken glass pane that let in the rain. That's when I saw it, a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at me from the darkness. The figure was tall and thin, with long spindly fingers and a face twisted into a snarl. It was the stuff of nightmares. I tried to back out of the booth, but the door wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The figure approached me slowly, its eyes fixed on mine. I could feel its breath on my face, hot and fetid. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear. The figure spoke, its voice like the hissing of a snake. "You've stumbled into my domain," it said. "And now, you must pay the price." With that, it lunged at me with its long, spindly fingers. I closed my eyes and braced for the worst. But when I opened them again, the figure was gone. I was alone in the booth. I tried to open the door again, and this time it opened easily. I stumbled out into the rain, shaking with fear. As I walked away, I heard the ringing of the phone booth again, and the sound of the figure's laughter echoing through the night. For days after the encounter, I was plagued by nightmares of the figure in the phone booth. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew that it was all too real. And now, whenever I walk down a dark street on a stormy night, I can't help but feel a sense of dread, wondering if I'll stumble upon the phone booth and the figure within. Story 4. It was a dark and stormy night when Julia heard her phone ringing. She hesitated for a moment before picking up, not recognizing the number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. A man's voice on the other end of the line spoke in a low, whispery tone. "You don't know me, but I know you," he said. "I've been watching you, Julia. I know everything about you." Julia's heart raced with fear as she clutched the phone tighter. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man on the other end chuckled darkly. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that I have a message for you." Julia could hear the rain pouring outside her window as the man spoke. "What message?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're going to die tonight," the man said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Julia's blood turned to ice in her veins as she listened to the man's words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll find out soon enough," the man said before hanging up the phone. Julia sat frozen in fear for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. She tried to convince herself that it was just a prank call, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more sinister. Suddenly, she heard a loud banging on her front door. She cautiously approached the door, peering through the peephole. Standing outside was a tall, dark figure with a hood covering his face. Julia's heart pounded in her chest as the figure spoke in a deep, menacing voice. "Let me in, Julia," he said. "I have something to show you." Julia hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door and letting the figure in. As he entered her house, a chill ran down her spine. There was something off about this man, something not quite human. The figure led her to her bedroom, where he revealed a small, wooden box. "Open it," he said. Julia hesitated for a moment before slowly lifting the lid. Inside the box was a human heart, still beating. She screamed and tried to run, but the figure grabbed her by the arm and held her in place. "You can't escape your fate," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. Julia's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, she remembered the knife she kept in her bedside table. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed the knife and plunged it into the figure's chest. He let out a guttural scream as he fell to the ground, lifeless. Julia breathed a sigh of relief as she collapsed onto her bed, the adrenaline wearing off. But as she looked down at the figure's lifeless body, she noticed something strange. His hood had fallen off, revealing a face identical to her own. It was then that Julia realized the truth. The man on the phone, the figure in her house, it was all her. She had been haunted by her own dark side, her own inner demon. From that day forward, Julia was never the same. She lived the rest of her days in fear of her own mind, never able to escape the darkness that lurked within her. Escape the darkness that lurked within her. Escape the darkness that